Well, hello Clarendon and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another digital art lesson. Today we will be talking about the brilliant Henri Matisse. We will be doing a collaging project where we will be focusing on these cutouts that he did later in his life. The materials you're going to need for today's lesson are a piece of paper to collage onto. So I have a nice big piece of paper that I found lying around. It's also a little thicker than normal, which is nice when you're doing collages. So a nice piece of paper to collage onto. If you have colored paper, we're going to need colored paper today. If you don't have colored construction paper or colored paper, make sure you have something to color with, and I'll talk more about that in a second, okay? The other thing that you're going to need is a pair of scissors, and you are going to need some glue, okay? The only thing that we're going to be using our pencil for today is to write our name, okay? So before we talk about Henri Matisse, I want to talk about one word that is very important in today's lesson, and that is the word collage. A collage in our project today, this is a collage that I did, and this is only one that I did. I did lots of them. That's how I can tell I'm excited about the project, is I can't stop doing my own examples. So we'll look at some more in a minute or two. So this is a collage where I cut things. In this case, I cut paper out and I glued it onto another surface, which in this case was another piece of paper. Okay, so a collage is when you cut something. In some cases, it can be a magazine or an old book that might be falling apart or an old photograph. So you cut something out and you paste it onto another surface to make a piece of art that way. And that is a collage. So today we will be doing our own collages. But first, let's talk about Henri Matisse. Okay? So first, just want to show some of his paintings. And he really broke the boundaries, meaning he did things other people didn't do in that time, especially with his use of color in this, where most of the painting is taken up by solid blocks of color, okay? And not a lot of artists were doing this in his time. He really explored the use of color in his artwork and his paintings. Look at the blue, how the blue just pops. First thing you see in this painting of his violin case. He was a very good musician. He played the violin for most of his life, and he often represented it in his artwork. So some of us as artists choose to draw or paint things that might be really important to us or things that we love. We talked about that in some of our other lessons. Here's one of his daughter. So he often drew people. We'll talk about it in a second. It was his most favorite thing to draw or represent in art, to sculpt or to paint. He was often drawing people, okay? Here's another one and some of his other drawings here. So in this book I read, it said that Henri Matisse, in most of his paintings, did lots of sketches or drawings before he did the actual painting. And that was to make sure that he had it just right before he started on the actual painting or his masterpiece, okay? So in this one, look at his use of color. The first thing you see is all of this white on her dress and in her hat. But then look at the background, how this velvety kind of red color in the back also complements the white very nicely. So one thing that he was very good at is balancing colors, okay? Okay, so after reading the Henri Matisse book to plan for today's lesson, I also decided to draw you a little drawing here that says some important things that I learned in the book, okay? So I want you to write Matisse, M-A-T-I-S-S-E, on your paper somewhere on your collage today, so that we know that your work was inspired from Henri Matisse, okay? So we see here, he was born in 1869. So like most of the artists I talk about with you all, he was born a long time ago. He passed away in 1954, okay? So he was a French artist known for his paintings, But he was a master of all the techniques of the artist. So he knew how to do everything from sculpting to painting to printing to drawing. So he knew how to do it all, okay? He was also known for his fluid movement. So his movement in his paintings and the fine attention to color, okay? Here are a couple fun facts that I learned about Henri Matisse. He loved cats and doves. He was inspired by artist Vincent van Gogh. He also loved Japanese woodblock art and was inspired by it as well. And he followed Japanese woodblock artists, and he also collected the artwork. The other thing is that his favorite thing to draw or paint or sculpt was people, okay? So some of the other words that I have written down here are some of the things that Matisse was really the master of, which was form and balance and color and line and shape. Those are the ones that I really stuck out to me that Matisse knew very well and was the master of. So some of the funny little things I have is that blue is everything above and red is down below in the earth. And we'll see a lot of red in Matisse's paintings. And one might see red places where you might not think red should be. Well, that's what I was talking about, where he was really exploring the use of color in ways that other artists weren't, okay? Line. So what I wrote for line was when doing the cutouts, he called it painting with scissors. Every cut he made was like painting lines. So when Matisse was doing these cutouts, he wasn't drawing the lines first, okay? Everything was free formed. He would just cut the lines as if he was like painting with a paintbrush, okay? The other thing is his use of shape. All of his cutouts focus mostly on shape, color, and different forms, okay? Forms, that moves us on to forms. The forms seen in his cutouts were mostly inspired by forms in nature. You might see this form behind me right here, which looks like some of the forms that maybe were inspired by Matisse. Okay, maybe Matisse was inspired by some forms like that. And also, I saw in his picture, he has a plant like that himself behind him. So I think he was inspired by forms in nature like those leaves. The other thing is balance. Remember, we talked about balance not meaning like you're going to fall down, but balance in artwork. So the cutouts had to be arranged and balanced just right. So here's a picture of him. Now, when he was doing these cutouts, he was older and it was later in his life, and he was in a wheelchair. So these cutouts were very big. He had to have someone else, an assistant, help him pin them onto the wall, pointing to his assistant exactly where and which way to put the cutout, right? He would pin them up on the wall, and then he would say, "Up, that is just right." And then they would glue them down on really, really big canvases, okay? Here's another picture just to give you a sense of how big some of these cutouts were. Now, this isn't the whole image of that, but there's one that you see, a cutout of very natural forms that he did, and also very beautiful colors. Here's another one that he did. Now, these were all from the early 1950s. So there were not any other artists around this time doing collages like this. Okay, Matisse was the only one really exploring colors and shapes and cutting out all different kinds of forms in this way. Okay. I want to look at this one just one more time because I'm going to talk right now about using not only what you cut out, but the other side of what you cut out as well in your collages today, okay? So don't just save the part that you cut out. So don't just save this part, but save the other part as well, because this is another shape that can be very cool to use in your collages too. I have lots of different shapes here. I have a whole basket of different shapes that I have cut out and saved I want you all saving your scraps, okay, especially as you're working, because you might find something that actually looks pretty cool that you might want to use in your collage, even if it doesn't really, this one's kind of cool too. See with that circle in the end there? Even if it doesn't really necessarily look like a shape, you could use this in the background and you can start gluing things on top of this, okay? Well, you'll notice that Matisse's weren't perfect shapes always, right? These squares that he cut out, they're not perfectly shaped, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind when you're cutting out yours today. Let's take a look at some of the other collages that I did, and then we will start on yours, okay? So here's another one that I did. Lots of this one kind of remind me of an ocean scene. He did an ocean scene actually with seaweed and seashells, and he made ones that kind of look like jellyfish, okay? Here's another one that I did. Now I was inspired by these checkerboards that he did in his, and I put them in mine here. Here's another one that I did. And I believe this was the first one that I did. I really like cutting out this spiral here. So I really want you to focus on cutting out really interesting shapes, okay? Here's one that I did where I did the opposite on one side as on the other, okay? So if you're an older student, you can also try this one out if you like. All right, and then I encourage you, like I said, to try to do one of a form. So here's a couple more that I did. Here's a person kind of looking up at this kind of building-like thing. And I have kind of a yin-yang opposite going on there. And here is a spiral. And I saved the other part and was able to use that in this one. So that's what I mean. This is a good example by saving all of your scraps and using them in your artwork today. Okay, let's get started on yours. If you don't have any colored paper lying around, that is totally fine, because what you can do is you can color white paper with your coloring utensils and then cut it out like this. Okay, so here I have the form that I chose to cut out, and then I'm also going to save this side too, and you can cut that out as well, okay? So I don't want anyone drawing their shape first. I want you just cutting it out without drawing it, because it's going to look totally different if you do that as opposed to drawing it, okay? Well, I hope you all learned something about Henri Matisse today, and especially about some of those beautiful cutouts that he did that we talked about in the lesson. And I look forward to seeing the collages that you all come up with. Keep in mind some of those words that we used today, like balance and form and shape, and especially color, okay? Keep all of those words in mind as you do your own collages. I look forward to seeing your artwork, and I will see you all next week.